Bill Richards, a psychologist who engaged in psychedelic studies as both a researcher and a participant, describes his experience like this. To my utter amazement, I soon discovered in my visual field the emergence of an exquisitely beautiful, multi-dimensional network of intricate neon-like geometric patterns. My awareness was flooded with love, beauty, and peace beyond anything I ever had known or wildly imagined to be possible. Awe, glory, and gratitude were the only words that remained relevant.
Welcome back to the channel. Welcome to the channel if you're new. And without wasting any time, let's get to the video.
On Good Friday in 1962, the scholar of religion Huston Smith said he encountered God for the first time. Smith joined an experiment held in the basement of Boston University's Marsh Chapel. Along with a group of fellow seminarians and religious studies scholars, he ingested some psilocybin, the psychedelic compound found in so-called magic mushrooms. The group then listened to the Good Friday service going on in the church upstairs, and many had a profound religious experience. Smith said he had already believed in God for as long as I can remember, but until the Good Friday experiment, I had no direct personal encounter with God. But his experience on psilocybin was the most powerful cosmic homecoming I have ever experienced. Huston Smith's experience was not unique. For thousands of years, humans have been taking psychedelic substances to induce so-called mystical experiences. Many people report feeling a sense of sacredness, transcendence, and awe. Others describe traveling to other domains of experience or encountering supernatural beings like gods or spirits, phenomena classically considered to be religious or mystical. When psychedelics are used in religious and spiritual contexts, they're often referred to as entheogens. The term entheogen derives from Greek, literally meaning something like to become divine within, or generating God within.
Do any of you know the difference between DMT and psychedelics? Are they the same thing or are they two different things? I'm not sure which is which, but if you know, feel free to tell me.
More simply, it could just mean inspired or full of God. It was coined in the 1970s as a way to avoid the negative associations with terms like hallucinogen or psychedelic. In other words, entheogens are psychedelics by another name, one that emphasizes their religious properties. The Marsh Chapel experiment was a product of its time. It was designed as part of a larger initiative at Harvard University, as research on psychedelics was ramping up in the 1960s. This ended with the Controlled Substances Act of 1970, which placed heavy restrictions on psychedelics and made them more difficult to study.
I've heard that they can be very dangerous, especially if you take it in high doses. I mean, of course, it'd be dangerous, but there are people out there who would get affected quite easily. I think it has something to do with your constitution. So even if it's your first time trying something like that, you can have like a psychotic episode. So try it at your own risk.
However, in the past couple of decades, psychedelic research has been making a comeback, shifting the conversation from the counterculture of the 1960s to mainstream discussions about mental health, therapy, and especially religion. This research gives us a better understanding of how psychedelics are believed to be a way to access spiritual or supernatural realms, agents, or experiences. Humans all over the world have been using psychedelics for rituals for thousands of years. Initiates of the ancient Greek mystery religion called the Eleusinian Mysteries ritually ingested a drink called kykeon, which may have had psychedelic effects, with some archaeologists arguing it was partly composed of a fungi containing LSD-like alkaloids. Archaeological evidence for the use of a cactus containing mescaline called peyote dates back 5,000 years in Mesoamerica, and using psychedelic mushrooms in religious ceremonies was also widespread. In 2008, archaeologists in Bolivia discovered a 1,000-year-old ritual bundle that contained traces of psilocybin and DMT. The bundle is believed to have belonged to a ritual specialist of the pre-Inca Tiwanaku civilization. Psychedelics are still used in religious rituals today. One example is the use of peyote in the Native American Church, or the NAC, which was founded in the late 19th century. Members of the NAC ingest peyote as a sacrament, and they view it as both a powerful herbal medicine and an omniscient spiritual entity.
Are psychedelics illegal, or are there any restrictions to taking something like this? Because, or maybe it depends on the region you're in. Sometimes it's illegal, sometimes it's not.
Practitioners often refer to it as mother peyote or father peyote and consider it to have a parent-like presence, watching their thoughts and behavior to help keep them on the right path. Another example is ayahuasca, traditionally used by more than 70 indigenous groups in the upper Amazon. The indigenous people of the Amazon use ayahuasca for all sorts of purposes, including prophecy, protection, and to diagnose and cure illnesses. In recent years, ayahuasca has grown in popularity, even inspiring a Brazilian religion called Santo Daime, which combines elements of indigenous ayahuasca use with Christianity, as well as some elements of Afro-Brazilian religion. After ingesting ayahuasca, some people claim to experience out-of-body journeys through alternate dimensions, while others report encountering an otherworldly source of unitive radiance. So we know that entheogens have been discovered, used, and adapted in many religions and many cultures, but what do we know about how they work? 4 of the best-studied entheogens include mescaline, psilocybin, DMT, and LSD. The first 3 are all naturally occurring substances. Mescaline is found in several species of cacti in the Americas. Psilocybin is found in more than 200 species of fungi, and DMT is found in a variety of plants and animals. LSD, on the other hand, is not a naturally occurring substance. It was originally made in a lab and continues to be produced synthetically. Once ingested, mescaline and LSD don't need to be altered in any way in order to create a psychedelic experience. Psilocybin and DMT, on the other hand, need to be metabolized in particular ways.
Initially, I thought that psychedelics was just one thing, something you found in mushrooms. But it seems like it's like a category of drug. It's its own thing, but it's divided into a couple substances that make up psychedelics. But yeah, it's good to know.
Bill Richards, a psychologist who engaged in psychedelic studies as both a researcher and a participant, describes his experience like this. To my utter amazement, I soon discovered in my visual field the emergence of an exquisitely beautiful, multi-dimensional network of intricate neon-like geometric patterns. My awareness was flooded with love, beauty, and peace beyond anything I ever had known or wildly imagined to be possible. Awe, glory, and gratitude were the only words that remained relevant.
I do wonder though, is this something you can get addicted to? Because I don't know, if I ever tried something like that, I don't think I'd be able to just stop at the first time. That's why I don't think I'll ever try it. But to any of you who have, tell me what your experience was like. Because I don't see myself trying something like that anytime soon.
Scientists describe experiences like this as the result of brain activity. The common psychedelic molecules that we've been talking about so far are all serotonergic, which means that they operate like the neurotransmitter serotonin in the brain. They bind to a specific subtype of serotonin receptor called the 5-HT2A receptor. Activating this receptor causes the subjective experiences associated with psychedelics, including hallucinations and reports of feelings of bliss. But for people on a psychedelic trip, they're not thinking about the 5-HT2A receptor. Notice the terms that Bill Richards used. Awe, glory, religious-y sounding terms, right? And scientists often do label these experiences as mystical type experiences. Now, personally, I think mystical is a weird term for scientists to use. It's usually associated with religious experiences, like encountering supernatural beings. And I did notice in my research that a lot of these scientists were very quick to say that they're not making any claim about the existence or non-existence of the supernatural whenever they call a psychedelic experience mystical. And it's because it's such a loaded term that many scholars of religion and psychedelics have argued it's not a useful term at all to describe these experiences. Different cultures and religious traditions interpret mystical experiences in various ways, so it's difficult to create an objective standard for what qualifies as mystical in the first place. In recent years, scholars have argued in favor of generic, academic terminology that can be applied across cultures, like psychedelic-induced non-ordinary states of consciousness, which I know does not roll off the tongue like the word mystical. But it is fair to ask, why have scientists been so quick to label these non-ordinary states of consciousness as mystical in the first place?
I feel like it's how us humans can best describe, something like this. It means different things to different people, but when you hear that, you have a general idea of what that person is trying to say. So I feel like mystical, fits pretty well. But yeah, I feel like they need to find a better word, to describe it because it's a bit confusing.
And it's because these experiences often closely resemble those described in some religious texts and rituals, feelings of transcendence and unity, as well as visions of supernatural beings. So let's start with the emotional component, a profound feeling of connectedness. A profound feeling of connection or unity is one of the most commonly reported feelings by people on a psychedelic trip. Consider a study conducted on a group of patients with clinical depression who were interviewed 6 months after a high dose of psilocybin. The researchers found that connection was one of the strongest themes reported by the participants, and many of them described this feeling in religious terms, even patients who had previously considered themselves not to be spiritual or religious. One patient described feeling the presence of God. I've always thought that he was a man because of the way I was raised, reading the Bible, but it felt like a female energy. Other patients saw Hindu gods, and at one point during the peak, one patient felt themselves becoming the god Shiva.
So I guess it's specific, and unique to everyone because I feel like it just amplifies what you already believe in or you used to believe in. I might be wrong, but I feel like depending on where you live and the life you've had, the high will mimic, what you've already felt before, like the intense emotions you felt before, and these psychedelics, amplify this feeling. At least that's what I think.
Others felt a connection to a nondescript supernatural force or a feeling of merging with the universe. One patient wrote, "I was everybody, unity, one life with 6 billion faces. I was the one asking for love and giving love. I was swimming in the sea, and the sea was me." Another
Yeah, that was pretty poetic, and I feel like the guy, got that from somewhere. But if that's what he really felt, then it must have been an amazing feeling, to feel something like that.
said, like Google Earth, I had zoomed out. I was absolutely connected to myself, to every living thing, to the universe. In another study, the researcher Leo Roseman and his colleagues studied the presence of mystical type experiences in a study on using psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression. To measure mystical experience, the team used an altered states of consciousness questionnaire. The Roseman team used the questionnaire to try to measure, among other things, the presence of a feeling of oceanic boundlessness. This term originates in a conversation between Sigmund Freud and the French intellectual and mystic Romain Rolland. Now, Freud considered religion to be an illusion, but Rolland argued that Freud failed to appreciate the true source of religious sentiments, a subjective feeling of something limitless, unbounded, as if it were oceanic.
It was Sigmund, that guy who, had a thing for his mom, or am I thinking of someone else? I don't know. If it's a good idea to, take anything that person said seriously. But maybe I don't know enough about the guy, and he contributed to science in some way. But yeah, maybe I'll look him up and see what he's about.
This questionnaire lists different types of sub-dimensions of oceanic boundlessness, a state of blissfulness, insightfulness, and disembodiment. The study ultimately found that in 20 patients with treatment-resistant depression, a psilocybin-induced experience of oceanic boundlessness predicted positive clinical outcomes. Some scholars describe this as the unitive experience of psychedelics, and it's closely related to another commonly reported religious-y sounding experience, a sense of awe. Now, the concept of awe has fascinated philosophers and religious studies scholars for years. Back in the 1800s, thinkers like Friedrich Schleiermacher and William James described it as a deep emotional response that people feel when they encounter something that is greater than themselves and beyond rational comprehension. Many argued that awe was the defining feature of religious experience. The psychologist Peter Hendricks defines awe as an emotion in the upper reaches of pleasure and on the border of fear that emerges from two feelings, a sense of vastness and accommodation. Accommodation refers to the need to adjust mental structures so as to integrate a new experience, sometimes involving fear or disorientation. I think this is partially why visionary texts like the Book of Revelation are frequently attributed to psychedelic trips.
I feel like that's the best explanation I've ever had for awe. It's like a mix between happiness or like a nice feeling and fear at the same time.
Because these texts are describing a sense of awe. A mix of amazement and fear, a sense of vastness as the small prophet encounters the hugeness of God. Accommodation is at play too as the prophet attempts to adjust and integrate the new experience that they're witnessing. That's not to say these visions are reporting on an actual psychedelic experience. As we'll explore in a future video, they probably are not. But the similar themes may explain why scientists have been so quick to label these psychedelic experiences as mystical in their research. These experiences of awe and unity are said to cause people to question their own worldview, which leads us to the next religious dimension of psychedelics, their ability to alter a person's belief in the supernatural. A study conducted by a team of researchers led by Christopher Timmerman investigated how psychedelic drugs affect people's metaphysical beliefs, specifically regarding reality, consciousness, and free will. The study recruited 866 participants who were planning to attend a ceremony involving some sort of psychedelic substance. People were asked to complete a survey that measured their metaphysical beliefs at different points, 1 week before the experience to establish a baseline, and then 1 day, 4 weeks, and 6 months after. The survey assessed levels of belief in strict philosophical materialism, the idea that everything is purely physical, as well as belief in dualism, the mind and body are separate, fatalism, the belief that events are predetermined, and panpsychism, the idea that mind or consciousness is a fundamental aspect of all things. So, for example, the survey asked questions like, do you think the physical world is an illusion generated by the mind? Or another question, do you believe reality is entirely constituted by physical objects and processes? After everyone took their trip, the researchers found that psychedelic experiences tended to shift the participants' belief away from strict materialism. They showed an increased belief in the existence of non-physical supernatural realms and a unifying principle beyond scientific explanation.
So they started believing there's more to like reality than what you can see and touch, and that there's some undefinable being or like reality somewhere out there, not necessarily like like some type of god, but something bigger than like human, I think. I hope I'm not confusing. I hope y'all get what I'm saying. But yeah, it's nice to see how how these psychedelics affected how they think about life and reality.
The researchers found that the experiences were rated as among the most meaningful, spiritual, and psychologically insightful lifetime experiences, with persisting positive changes in life satisfaction, purpose, and meaning attributed to the experiences. Another study of over 4,000 people compared 2 types of encounters: people who claim to have encountered God without the influence of drugs, and people who say they did with the help of psychedelics. Both groups reported similar sensory phenomena, hearing voices, seeing visions, or just a feeling of some deep, profound emotion. The differences were striking though. For example, the researchers found that people in the non-drug group were much more likely to say they encountered a personality, God, or some sort of emissary of God like an angel. 41% of the non-drug group say they encountered God, versus only 18% in the psychedelic group. Those in the psychedelic group were much more likely to describe their encounter in less personal words, like encountering an ultimate reality. Now, science is still scratching the surface when it comes to understanding entheogens and religion, but it's already providing insights into many of the states of consciousness that are classically associated with religion: a feeling of awe, beliefs in the supernatural, and encounters with otherworldly beings.
I feel like this would be very difficult because the way people think, is different from, each other. People have their own worldviews, and the environments they grew up in affect, how they see the world. So I don't know how they can even, get close to measuring, what these psychedelic effects are. Because even in our own minds, you're never the same person you were, a few years ago, or when you were a child. You've changed a lot. So I don't know how they'd be able to like measure this, but I feel like that's what science likes most. Trying to figure out things like this is why those people do what they do, and I find it to be very interesting.
And this gets us back to what makes entheogens so compelling in the first place. They sit at an unusual crossroads between the material and the subjective, science and religion. On one hand, psychedelics are physical substances, molecules that interact with serotonin receptors and alter brain activity in ways that we can measure. On the other hand, the experiences they produce are described in profoundly mystical terms: unity, awe, spiritual transformation, and encounters with what many people experience as divine entities. It's this tension between chemistry and mysticism that makes entheogens such a rich object of study, and why they continue to challenge how we think about religion, experience, and the boundaries of science itself.
This makes me wonder who was the first person, to ever try, something like this, and what was he, doing when he did, and what was he like. But yeah, that was a pretty fun video. If you want to see this video without the reaction, I'll leave the link in the description. You can go check out his channel. He has many more videos like this, and they're all pretty good. And yeah, thank you all for watching, and see you guys in the next video.
Kick.